Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Evans. I'm a former NHS doctor and CEO of the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, which I co-founded in October 2020 in response to unethical COVID policies. We campaign on issues relating to medical ethics and, at the request of Baroness Hallett, submitted a 49-page witness statement to Module 4, detailing our work and multiple letters we have sent to policy and decision makers since our first open letter in November 2020 to the MHRA, the JCVI, and Matt Hancock, alerting them to serious safety and ethical concerns relating to the COVID vaccines and rollout. The failure of Module 4 to even address fundamental questions about the ethics of the COVID vaccine rollout is a travesty. Vital questions have not been asked, such as whether the policies and decisions made were morally right or in accordance with long-established principles of medical ethics, or whether the vaccine should have been rolled out at all, given the lack of safety data, and let alone to pregnant women or those least at risk, such as children. The failure to apply restraint or wisdom in the rollout of COVID jabs has resulted in unprecedented numbers of injuries and deaths reported to the MHRA. This is arguably the biggest avoidable public health disaster in history and would never have happened if the authorities and healthcare professionals had just stuck to core ethical principles that have always framed and constrained the delivery of healthcare. It is indisputable that medical ethics were egregiously violated during the rollout. These principles, enshrined into law and professional codes of practice, uphold the equal value and worth of every person and their right to freely decide what happens to their body. They hold healthcare professionals accountable and protect vulnerable patients from abuse. They cannot just be discarded in an emergency because this is when they're most needed to protect individuals against panicky state decisions. All medical interventions carry a risk of harm, so there's a duty to act with care and proportionality. The ethical practice of medicine uses a patient-centered model, where the doctor acts in the best interests of their patient. Informed consent must be obtained for all treatment after a full explanation of risks and benefits, and crucially, with no coercion. Privacy and confidentiality are vital. Every single one of these requirements were violated in the COVID vaccine rollout as a utilitarian ideology allowing the sacrifice of an individual for the greater good was adopted. In addition, the failure of the authorities to implement the precautionary principle was staggering. They set out to vaccinate every person in the country with a novel vaccine with only 2 months of safety data as quickly as possible, regardless of their individual risk-benefit profile. Never before has a vaccine still in clinical trials been given to children and pregnant women on such a mass scale. With no data to rule out harmful medium and long-term effects, the regulators were authorizing blind. This was a reckless gamble by the authorities with the health and lives of millions of UK citizens. In Module 4, as you've heard, we heard the testimonies of the vaccine injured and bereaved, whose devastating stories are evidence that this terrible gamble failed. Anna Morris, the KC who represented the vaccine injured groups, pointed out in her opening statement that the groups she represents present what is an uncomfortable truth for many, that vaccine injury and death are part of the pandemic story, and that the injured and bereaved are neither anti-science nor anti-vaccine, but they are real people with real experiences. Contrary to the glib claims of the vaccine safety experts at the inquiry, there is now overwhelming evidence, which will be presented by my colleagues, that the vaccines are neither safe nor effective. Catastrophic and avoidable harm has resulted from the reckless rollout of these insufficiently tested products. It may be claimed that we had no choice due to the threat from COVID. However, we always have a choice, and the choices made were unwise and unethical and should never have been allowed. Okay, so informed consent. It is arguable that no one gave valid informed consent to these products. This slide lists the minimum information required to make an informed decision. I'll just let you have a little look at it. So I'm sure you will agree that the information provided if you went to a vaccine centre fell well short of this level of disclosure. And in addition to the lack of information, coercive messaging, fear-mongering, and even lies were used by public health authorities to pressure and shame people into accepting jabs. The policies to address vaccine hesitancy undermined the right to free medical choice. The term anti-vaxxer was used to shut down legitimate questions and concerns. Many people took the jab under false pretenses, believing it would protect others. And the extreme coercion of vaccine passports and mandates crossed the line into overt medical tyranny. An ethical doctor is the only protection a vulnerable patient has from a dehumanized one-size-fits-all public health system and from the powerful vested interests of Big Pharma. Yet the few courageous ethical doctors who dared to voice vaccine safety concerns were persecuted and censored by health authorities, media, and their own regulators. It is very serious for patient safety when doctors can't advocate for their patients and become mere agents of the state. So COVID policies have set a dangerous precedent, normalizing the unethical. We are hurtling down a slippery slope of increasing state overreach into individual healthcare decisions. Politicians and bureaucrats have no place in the consulting room or the practice of medicine on individuals. We must urgently re-establish a clear ethical boundary to prevent the state abusing its power to force medical treatment on an individual. The power of the state in any future health emergency must be restricted, not expanded. And individual rights and medical ethics must be firmly upheld in all circumstances. Finally, we are calling for an immediate halt to the COVID mRNA vaccine rollout. It is indefensible that the authorities are still recommending the injection of these dangerous products into anyone. And we are calling for justice for the vaccine injured and bereaved. It is well past time for them to be recognised and fully compensated for the appalling and unnecessary harm they have suffered. And this must never be allowed to happen again. Thank you.